Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 20th of April 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. We'll be joined by live video Skype link by Alex Thompson, who is presently in Ghent. Well, the weather is glorious here in Plymouth, and we've had numerous reports of sunshine from across the country. That includes Wales, England, Wales. I don't have any reports from north of the border at the moment, so hopefully it's nice for the Scots as well, Mike.
Indeed.
I'm sorry, I was going to say politically, certainly not nice for us. And you're going to start with the European Commission.
Yes, European Commission here. They are saying that UK businesses are, or at least the government is saying that UK businesses are set to be at the heart, apparently, of the fourth industrial revolution. We're going to embrace digital technologies, which apparently is going to improve productivity. And so yesterday, the EU Commission, as we can see here, published details of how businesses across the EU, including those in the UK, can get better access to technologies that will help them modernize. And so what are we talking about here? 4 areas of working: digitizing European industry, which sets out how the European Commission will help industries to take advantage of digital technologies, supporting collaboration between the EU and UK high-value manufacturing. The European Cloud Initiative, apparently, that's going to be used by the science community, and priorities for IT standardization, which are going to make it easier for British businesses to operate in the single market.
Well, that's good. Nicely timed.
Yes, indeed, yes. And an e-government action plan for 2016 to 2020, which will help modernise public administration, making it easier for UK citizens and businesses to access government services in other European countries. So what we're talking about is the amalgamation, the merging, the establishment of a single IT system for government access across the European Union. And Baroness Neville Rolfe, who apparently is the business minister with her multicoloured hair, says this is the fourth industrial revolution and it's going to fundamentally change the way we do business in this country. And she looks forward to working with the Commission on a package that works for UK businesses. And she's looking forward to agreeing a way forward in the Competitiveness Council. So there you go. Does that say to you that we that there's any possibility whatsoever of us leaving the European Union?
Well, as we're going to see on the EU referendum, little chance because the vote's going to be rigged. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But I'll just comment on this one, Mike, that 10 years ago, probably more than that now, I got very interested in Plymouth, watching how the true commercial part of the city was being subsumed into all of the quangos. We were linking business links, so bona fide businesses were being sucked into a quasi-governmental structure. And I think this is the reason why, because it's now going to be evolving European-wide.
Have you any thoughts on this, Alex?
Well, I think in the continent it's pretty much accepted that we're going to be in until the end of time. Perhaps less so up north in the Netherlands where I live, but certainly down here in Belgium, people have got the attitude that if you do anything well, you need to do it at an EU level. And this kind of attitude of there's nothing between the local region and the EU superstate has really crushed national thought in a lot of countries. There's a bit left in France, in the Netherlands perhaps, but countries like Germany, Belgium, they have a kind of anti-patriotism in the business world as well. See, it's our little company, our local region, lobbying Brussels, and then the world's your oyster. It's a completely failed model, of course, because you need a nation behind you to provide you with educated people and the raw materials you need. But Britain seems to be heading, if we're not careful, towards that same attitude of the EU is here to stay.
Alex, thank you very much for joining us, for that comment and joining us today. I'll just say for our viewers and listeners that you're out and about in Ghent, we understand today, and hence there's that little bit of echo as you're speaking, but you are clear, so thank you for that.
Okay, let's move on then to Mervyn King, because he's made a comment here. Obviously, we have had this huge amount of Treasury money spent on the Treasury producing their report, which we covered this a couple of days ago, talking about how we are going to lose out badly if we leave the European Union. Well, this is Mervyn King, who was speaking to Bloomberg, and he has said that any such claims are exaggerated, and that really this Treasury document should be is really more of a public relations campaign. He said one should be very cautious of precise numerical estimates of what the consequences would be of leaving. And he said that I'm old enough to remember the referendum in Britain in 1975 on exactly the same issue. One thing that both sides of the argument then were wrong about is that that it would make a dramatic difference. It didn't. I think it's very important that people should not exaggerate the impact either of staying in or of leaving. I do worry that people on both sides treating this as a public relations campaign rather than as a debate on the future of the country are inclined to exaggerate because they feel they're selling a position. And then he said, what's more important is we have a calm and reflective debate about the role of Britain in Europe, our relationship with the continent, which we have struggled with for several hundred years. Well, if we're going to have a calm and reflective debate, I wonder, is this the place to have it? Because this is the BBC now advertising tickets, which are now available for the Great Debate, which is going to take place on the 21st of June. The details are on the BBC website. I suggest that as many people as possible, they are free, there's no cost in going to this. As many people as possible should go to this. It's going to be a live debate, and it might be nice to see some real intervention happening on live BBC television on this issue.
That would be pretty good. I was going to say there is some cost to it, which is your mental state, but it's BBC.
Depends what you go there to do, doesn't it?
Indeed, yeah.
Okay. David Cameron, what's he up to? Well, here we go. He is sorry. That is.
Britain is the second biggest economy.
Yes. That was Sorry, that was Alex's. Yes.
Arguments for remaining in the EU as well as the anti, because they're going to come up against both of them in the months and years to come. And as we read through Cameron's speech, I suddenly paused in mid-flow when I realised what he was saying here. He says that, he gives us two pro points, shall we say, in the first two of those. Maybe you could just pop it back on screen for a moment. Thank you. Britain's the second biggest economy, often the French claim they are, after Germany. We are the second biggest contributor. And here's the crunch. Along with France, we are its foremost military power. Now that phrase is ambiguous enough in English, isn't it? You can just about singularize what should be a plural here, because an unambiguous statement would be, we and France are the foremost military powers. This is ambiguous. It's just about permissible in English. But there's also a German translation of this on the Downing Street site. Zusammen mit Frankreich sind wir die wichtigste militärische Macht der EU. And that trick doesn't work in German, so it makes it pretty clear in the German translation, at least, that the meaning of the English is we plus France equals one military power.
Right.
Right. So that's quite a different perspective on what he was saying.
Yes, it is, and it shows his thinking even 6 months ago, and the government behind him, of course, is. We don't operate individually anymore, and as the UK columnist has been quick to point out, since 2010 we've had an explicit, albeit secret, increasingly open now, policy of doing everything together with the French.
Indeed.
And of course, it was the UK columns expose and all of those meetings with the Franco-British Council and the residence of the British ambassador in Paris, where this 50-year pact with the French was spawned. Significantly, no debate in Parliament whatsoever. And we're going to come on to that topic a little bit later, because the subject of should there be any debate in Westminster on putting troops overseas has also been quashed.
Yes. Okay, let's talk about law, because crime, apparently we are going to be setting up a new defence portal. Now I wondered what a defence portal has got to do with law, but this began back in September. And this was the government announcement back in September. There's a chance to help shape the criminal justice system digital future for defence. And what they were looking for is defence practitioners. This is lawyers that work in providing people with their defences. They were needed to help inform and shape the development of an online portal which will allow the defence to access essential criminal case information, interact with the prosecution and the courts, and download initial disclosure of the prosecution case. Well, that's all fair and good, but Brian, you and I know, because we've witnessed it, that in criminal cases, sometimes the defence colludes with the prosecution in order to, well, we don't need to put this little bit of information in, or we don't need to put that little bit of information in. So we're now
perverting the course of justice, right?
Absolutely. And so now we are, in fact, moving this forward by turning that into a digital process. So why are we mentioning this now? Well, that's because Liverpool has been chosen. This was announced yesterday. Liverpool has been chosen as the pilot for this defence portal. And apparently anybody that wants to find out more can do so at a defence engagement event at the Queen Elizabeth II Law Courts in Liverpool on the 10th of May between 9 o'clock and 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. Lawyers and administrators are welcome. I wonder, are the public welcome to that?
Well, no, Mike, because the whole point of this is to make sure that the public are completely cut off from the justice system. People can't get into courts now. Courts are blocked. You've got to have an appointment to get into the court. You can't just say that you're a member of the public there to see justice being done. And this is a way of putting a fence around the justice system, an electronic fence, so that people can't get access to justice. Unbelievably dangerous, I would think.
Yes.
Alex, a quick comment for you, if you'd like.
Yes, what comes to mind is that I covered the Legal Wales conference, Cymru'r Gyfraith, that happened last year because it was mentioned by a Welsh lord in the committee hearing I mentioned a few days ago. And what was important there is that Sir Ernest the Dishonest, we might like to call him, gave a speech which is on the website, in which he said that the judge of the future, with Wales as the pioneering jurisdiction, is going to have to be more than an umpire. He's going to have to decide what goes in the brief.
Yeah.
Wow. It couldn't be clearer, could it?
Well, we are moving into very serious, very dangerous times, and our news today, we never know until first thing in the morning what's going to come into the day's news, but we've got a collection of subjects here which build a very dangerous picture. Let's have a look at this one. It's local Plymouth MP Johnny Mercer, who we are calling a poodle, but he's saying that Parliament should not have a final say in deploying troops. And the reason is the majority of parliamentary members are too ill-informed to make decisions on military intervention, and responsibility should lie with the Prime Minister. We should allow David Cameron to make decisions on when troops are going to be deployed. Not Parliament, not our elected representatives, but David Cameron. And we better bring in Michael Fallon, Secretary for Defence. He said, I don't think we should be going to war based on sometimes well-intentioned but nevertheless ill-informed debate in the House of Commons. Isn't it this man's job to make sure that the debate is informed, Mike?
Allegedly.
Allegedly. Going to war is one of the hardest decisions we will make. The Prime Minister sees all the restricted military feeds, and we elect him in a democratic country to make that decision. No, we don't.
No, we don't.
we elect our MPs to decide what the public wants. This is an elite buried in Parliament, and they are starting to show their colours. Have a look at the Guardian's take here. I'm calling them a dangerous warmongering elite because this is what they do. I should emphasise that the Prime Minister and I have to take decisions about the deployment of ships and planes and troops. We do not want to be artificially constrained in action to keep this country safe. So when elected representatives stand up in Parliament and say, we don't want this to happen, they're just artificially constraining Mr. Cameron and Mr. Fallon. This is stunning stuff.
It is, but it should be noted, of course, that this is really the same debate that's going on in the United States at the moment, the same fight that's going on in the United States at the moment about whether the legislature has any role to play in the deployment of troops, because of course Obama, representing the executive, is determined to try to keep that as something that he decides, and he decides alone. Well,
he joked, didn't he, in front of a very big public audience about how nice it would be to get rid of the baggage and just make decisions on his own. So we've got an equivalent going on here.
Dictatorship on both sides of the Atlantic.
Yeah, it's a suited dictatorship. It's got a veneer of respectability, but this is as vicious as Nazi Germany, more deceitful, I would say. Well, let's have a look at what the problem is with ill-informed politicians, and what better place to go than Plymouth and Oliver Colville, Tory MP. Here he is tweeting out that he's getting ready to act as chairman of the Built Environment, and of course he needs a picture of himself, big himself up. But of course what this man has also been doing is concentrating on hedgehogs. So we would just suggest that he's doing two things. He's helping to promote the breakup of UK through city-states, and then he's not interested in defence, major importance to Plymouth in particular. He's going to focus on hedgehogs. Well, we are going to keep the black humour going here, but Colville also boasting that he was at Exeter University with the Prime Minister. Exciting stuff. And this is David Cameron clearly briefing students on the forthcoming EU vote and how it's going to be rigged. So naturally there's a big audience. But in a dark recess, we did see that our old friend Mr. Prickles OBE was there. And he said, well, actually, Cameron was lying through his teeth during the whole meeting because the EU has the constitution of a dictatorship and the laws of a police state. This is sinister comedy, Mike, that we've got two politicians calmly saying we make the decision as to where British troops go for overseas. If we want a war, we move the troops. And then we've got grown men who are blubbing over the fact that 75 hedgehogs have been released into the wild. Is this a psychological operation going on here, Alex? There's something beginning to really break down common sense and clear thinking in the British government.
You know, Brian, I'm fascinated that you have coupled the question of psychological manipulation with Exeter University, because it's your local Russell Group Centre of Excellence University down there in the West Country. And we've seen coverage of the Russell Group in the last couple of days that the Russell Group universities, according to a leaked government document, don't actually provide the right tuition for the top whack 9,000 a year fees that they're charging. And when I saw that, I immediately thought that Exeter was probably the one that they're thinking of. I hope that Exeter don't sue me for saying so, but I'm saying it in Belgium anyway. And the reason I'm saying that is that you have highlighted repeatedly how Exeter University, since its foundation really, seems to have been a test bed for all kinds of Tavistock-like manipulation. Of course, Tavistock itself, the reason the Tavistock Group is called that is because that club was in Devon before they moved to London.
This is absolutely correct, and we'll also remind viewers and listeners that Exeter University, of course, boasts on its specialist department in matters esoteric, a little bit of witchcraft and Satanism. So if you're into that sort of thing, get your child to Exeter University. I better stop there.
Now, yesterday, of course, we had a special UK column news with Vanessa Beeley, and we were talking about Yemen and the activities of Saudi Arabia. Well, Saudi Arabia increasingly coming under pressure, not just about Yemen, as we'll see, but late yesterday afternoon, the Express published this article highlighting Britain's involvement, which this is really one key point that we were trying to make in yesterday's programme, the fact that the UK and the United States are really part and parcel of this genocide in Yemen. So the Express and other newspapers, Independent as well, and a bunch of other newspapers, talking about the billions, £2.8 billion of arms deals with Saudi since the Saudi kingdom began bombing Yemen more than a year ago. So 122 military licenses to the Saudis since March 2015, and more than £1 billion of ML4 licenses, which allows the sale of cluster bombs, explosive bomblets, landmines, and missiles. But it's the cluster bombs that are doing the real nasty damage, because of course, as Vanessa pointed out yesterday, the manufacturers claim that they will have a success rate which would see only 1% of the bomblets not exploding. But of course, if you have 1% of hundreds of little bomblets not exploding, those act as landmines for the future. And we were pointing out that children in particular continue to suffer from this problem. So this issue needs to be addressed urgently. So if you haven't seen yesterday's UK Column News, please get on the UK Column website and share it around. It's also on YouTube as well. But the other issue with regard to Saudi, of course, has been the hiding of the redaction of the 28 pages of the 9/11 report. Of course, I don't think there's anybody watching this program believes that the whole September 11th thing was a Saudi plot, but nonetheless, Saudi people involved in the setup of that. It was much bigger than just Saudi Arabia. But this report from the Australian here, referring to a 47-page document. There were 29 documents, in fact, in total released, but particularly one was damning because it was a 47-page document which really identified the Saudi government officials that were directly involved in sponsoring some of the people that were involved in the September 11th attacks. So these 29 documents are the documents which were really used as the foundation for the redacted 28 pages. So perhaps it's less important now that those become unredacted, but nonetheless, absolutely showing the direct links between not only the Saudi royal family, but Saudi government officials and intelligence officials in the operation to bring down the Twin Towers that day. Alex, have you got any thoughts?
Really, the only thing I could add is that nobody anywhere in Europe has got a good word to say about Saudi Arabia. And in fact, on the continent, they're sometimes more vocal than we are about what kind of regime that is. One of the cachets that we have as British, if you look at the continent, is that we are right up there with the Americans, in bed with the Saudis. And I think sometimes they're more aware in Brussels than we are of just how much Saudi Arabia is dictating our own foreign policy now.
Indeed. We discussed this last week, Alex, but more on Georgia this time. This is NATO preparing, according to the New Europe website here, NATO preparing to allow or offer Georgia and Ukraine an associate partnership, as they're describing it, and this is apparently going to take place at the NATO summit in Warsaw in July. They're calling it a 28+2 arrangement, and they're saying that this is similar to what Finland and Sweden have, where they don't get the Article 5 defense commitment. So in other words, it's not like when, if you remember when Turkey shot down the Russian jet, they basically immediately started with the rhetoric, well, an attack on Turkey would be an attack on all NATO countries, and NATO's duty bound to protect us. This doesn't extend to Georgia and Ukraine in this case. But this is an interesting development nonetheless. And just to reiterate this, Council on Foreign Relations don't believe that this associate partnership status is enough. They're actually going for full membership. We mentioned last week, Alex, that the South Ossetian government was going to hold a referendum on whether to leave Georgia and join the Russian Federation. Do you think this is a response to that?
It could be, although usually the Russians are several steps ahead of the CFR clique, and they're anticipating a couple of chessboard moves ahead. So perhaps this could be a kind of spiteful reaction, but it's more likely that the Russians have actually got ahead of them and announced the referendum so that, having seen Georgia was being egged on into associate partnership, the Russian move would ensure that the South Ossetians would already be a part of the Russian Federation by the time that Georgia became a kind of second-tier NATO member. As for Georgia and Ukraine having an association partnership, well, I was something of an expert at international level on NATO relations with Georgia and Ukraine in my day, and I've never heard of an association partnership. Someone could shoot me down and say, aha, it's something you should have known about because the Finns have had it for years, but I'm wondering, it looks like all the first ring countries outside Russia are being treated by the CFR as expendable assets, as it were, kind of what we call them burnt zones, or zones that you could give over to total obliteration without having to go to war with Russia. And behind that, perhaps, are American and Britain's stooges that are actually expected to send troops and engage. It's a very dangerous game.
Yes, so what you're suggesting is that they offer associate membership that allows them to poke a stick at Russia, but if Russia should do anything, then they're left high and dry because there's no commitment to offer them the support that that other NATO countries have.
Absolutely, and I've spent considerable time in all of these countries, Finland, Ukraine, Georgia, and I can tell you, fantastic, genius nations as they are, their downfall is this visceral Russia hatred in their national makeup. And yes, you can understand it in the case of the likes of Estonia, where I've seen, the bitterness is still there, of course, about how atrociously they were treated by Stalin. But as a result, their whole national development and character is stunted, and they end up thinking that Russia is pulling the strings everywhere in the world where there's evil, and as a response to fall into the arms of the United States and NATO. So yes, these nations and the CFR clique will be well aware of it, and the London equivalent, Chatham House and the like. They're very much the expendable mercenaries, as it were, or proxies to be hurled at Russia.
Yes. Right. So not so long ago, we were discussing the suspension of the French constitution as a result of the Paris attacks. And you were making the point that France is likely to continue to just keep extending this state of emergency and extending it. And it looks like you were bang on the money, Alex, because what they've decided to do now is to extend it to cover the Euro 16 football championships. Because the state of emergency was due to end, I believe it's the 26th of May, and now they're basically wanting to push it on out to July, and undoubtedly in July we'll find something else to come along and allow them to push it out even further. The French people, are they just asleep?
I think that many of them are petrified. You know that they had a former collaborationist, François Mitterrand, as the president, whom they regard as their greatest post-war president, certainly since de Gaulle. And what was great about him? I mean, he was a wartime Vichy collaborationist. That there's a streak in the French people that says, we just have to roll under and take the blows and not stand up to this. I haven't seen any French journalism protesting much against it, even though the reality of this state of emergency is that anyone, and not just these North African Arabs, anyone who the French state takes a dislike to can have their door battered down in the middle of the night without warning, without a warrant.
Yeah. Yes, well, it's interesting because they're saying that there've been more than 3,500 searches carried out since that state of emergency was enacted, and 400 arrests. I wonder how many convictions there have been.
Well, one reads very, very little about convictions, either France or here in Belgium. One does read every day in the Belgian press about suspect X, who's been whipped up into a national bogeyman, because of his having been arrested in Molenbeek, has been moved from jail Y to jail Z. That's what fills the column inches, really, not any trials. There's no mention of trials here. And of course, in the Franco-Belgian model, you have an investigating magistrate anyway, a juge d'instruction, who, as with Sir Ernest's new model for Wales and the whole of Britain, simply says at the beginning of the case, I'm taking charge here, I'm going to decide what's going in the folder, and I'm going to predetermine the results. And the French even have juries, and the Belgians too, for assizes, the initial stage of a trial. But the judge sits with the jury and says, you will find this man guilty.
Yeah. Well, that's also happening in UK courts, but we take the point. Have a look at this on the basis of what's happening in France. Here's the BBC. 1 million UK workers to get terror response training. This has come out of the National Police Chief Council, and it's growing on the back of another initiative we'll see in a minute. So it expands an existing scheme which currently sees police train around 100,000 workers a year, everyone to play a part in keeping the public alert. This is BBC correspondent Frank Gardner. He said the issue of preparing for a possible terror attack has been troubling the police and intelligence agencies since the marauding terrorist attacks in Mumbai in 2008. So that happened in 2008, and 8 years later, we're going to have people spying on each other. Here's the gentleman concerned, and I found it ironic that he's now in a wheelchair as a result of being shot 6 times in Saudi Arabia. So we're pointing the finger at the Saudis there. Here we are, the man who's saying we need to be spying on each other is shot in Saudi. The real plan to train and reframe people into being suspicious and fearful of each other. This, in our opinion, is part of big society, and that is a Stasi state. And this is the operation that's been going on since 2004, Griffin. And they're going to be building on Griffin. You can go on the site and have a look at some of the documentation, but it's all about awareness of current terrorism and crime issues, empowering people to report suspicious activity and behaviour. This is getting people to spy on each other, Mike. And then down here we've got emergency deployments where even more people are going to be brought into the field. But what I found interesting is if you go looking for the people who are running it, you can identify the police, you can obviously background check them. Here's 3 men, no explanation whatsoever as to who these people are. So quite amazing stuff. But apparently it's all about democracy.
This is People's Assemblies, and this was a report. It was actually a few days ago, possibly a week ago, that this was launched. It was launched in the Houses of Parliament, and it was a report from Democracy Matters into the People's Assemblies, which were launched. At least the pilots were run late last year. This is the report which describes the success of those or failure, depending on your point of view. And of course, these are about bringing the public in, apparently, even though they're not really the public, it's kind of third sector organizations and this kind of thing, to discuss devolution, the breakup of the country, the constitution, because apparently, the way we are governed in the United Kingdom is changing, Brian. It's just changing all by itself. It's completely organic, happening by itself. Nobody's driving it at all. And that's according to them anyway. In England, Scotland, Wales and Ireland, and some parts, in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland and some parts of England, more powers are being shifted away from Westminster towards devolved bodies and representatives at the local level. So there you go. That's great. And along the same kind of lines, I suppose, this is a new inquiry into the work of the civil service. And it says here that during the 2010-2015 Parliament, the government introduced a programme of reform which aimed to make the civil service, quotes, more economic and provide faster service to the public. However, the reform plan fell short of addressing fundamental questions about the role and design of the civil service. This was identified as a major failing by the Public Administration Select Committee in its September 2013 report, Truth to Power: How the Civil Service Reform Can Succeed. And so now they're going to be focusing on the structure and organisation of the civil service and how appropriate it is for the 21st century, the effectiveness of the civil service in delivering government policy and how well it learns from success and from failure, the civil service's collective capabilities and civil servants' individual skills. And here you've got it, risks to civil service impartiality. Well, I think we've seen the risks to civil service impartiality with this EU referendum, as the civil service has been used as a campaigning tool by David Cameron, George Osborne and his government.
Absolutely, Mike, and we've got a little bit on the EU referendum. Just remind people, of course, that Eric Pickles was the man who said he may look like an unlikely revolutionary, but revolutionary was the term he was using. And what we are watching is a bulldozer going through the British Constitution. Alex, this is becoming so obvious what's going on here, but basically Britain is being dismantled from the inside.
Yes, I'm sitting here in the heart of the beast, not far from Brussels, and we've been telling each other in Britain since the 70s that we're being dismantled from outside, but you're absolutely right, Brian. No one in Brussels, anywhere in Europe, on the continent, has got any...
And at that point we
want to carve it up, and our civil service is quite respected. So what really I think is happening is happening in Westminster rather than Brussels.
Absolutely.
Okay. Apologies, a slight break up on the sound there, but we'll carry on through. Well, what's happening in UK? Mr. David Barmby is a gentleman who's been doing a huge amount of work to expose the sheer horrors of the EU referendum vote. If you haven't read his book yet, The EU a Corporatist Racket, please do, because in that book is the evidence of how the vote was fixed in 1975, and they are doing exactly the same thing again. This is part of Mr. Barmby's comments, and he's for today, and he's pointing out that 650 local constituency counts will be controlled from above. And those local accounting officers are not allowed to report to the public once a vote has happened in your local area on the referendum. They have to pass the figures up the line where they're all collated by who, we don't know, the government. And then when there's an approved figure for the count, that we get told as a nation. So the normal processes of a parliamentary election have been abandoned, and there's now this pyramid of control. So do get hold of that book, The EU a Corporatist Racket, because you can read the evidence. And of course, go and have a look at these people yourself. Here's the Electoral Commission. They've got a document all about the verifying and counting of votes, which doesn't reassure me. They've also got a corporate plan, which is always good to know. And of course, if you have a look in that, it says that there shouldn't be any undue influence in the way the elections and political finance system works, except there's been complete bias in the amounts of money put forward. And they then admit that there's a little bit of a problem with negative perceptions of politics and politicians, and of course a little bit of voting fraud. Well, actually quite a lot, that they had to do their own report into it. But surprisingly, although they say that around 1/3 of the public think electoral fraud is a problem, Mr. Pickles then says, well, it isn't really a problem, so stop worrying about it, Mike. But the press show quite clearly that it is a problem, and I think we should be saying that there's going to be a big problem in this forthcoming EU vote.
Absolutely.
I'll just move on through these. Alex, what do you think is going to happen? That's an unfair question for me, but do you think it's going to be stay in or leave?
Well, there are those who say that they expect the popular will for leave actually to be allowed through. And I think you and I were of that position perhaps a few weeks ago, because we were so cynical as to say that it wouldn't make any difference to how Britain was governed because of global government structures. But now I think I'm swinging back to wondering whether there's such fear among our political masters that they will actually rig the election. And what you've just revealed there, which is a total shocker and completely new to me, about passing secret results up the chain to the centre, that's the model which we, through the Council of Europe, had to force Eastern European countries to abandon, so countries like Azerbaijan and Georgia in the last decade or so, because, and there were even BBC documentaries showing this happening, early police chiefs were running around at 10 p.m. when polls closed, pushing the ballot papers boxes into these regional counting centres and keeping the press out. And we, through our involvement in this Council of Europe and election monitoring, forced them to declare at each level. So we're moving in exactly the opposite direction to what we have always insisted for our own elections.
And we're getting you're giving us yet another angle on the fact that it's heading towards vote rigging. You use a system which has been highly successful in Eastern Europe and you import it back into UK. Well, the Express has...
It has actually a name.
I missed that.
Yeah, it's...
Sorry, I was just going to add that it has a formal name in Eastern Europe. It's called the Carousel. Sinn Féin had a version of it too called Vote Early, Vote Often. No doubt we'll be more sophisticated and digital about it, but it's a well-known technique in Eastern Europe.
Okay. Well, here is your Express article with the serious stuff underneath the breasts and bottoms. So we've got Leave Now, Dutch urge Britons to back Brexit. Some serious stuff going on in Holland, I think.
Yes, the Express and other papers are not actually over-egging the pudding here. The Dutch are very hacked off about what's going on now with the EU. And you put on the screen there Jeroen Dijsselbloem's quotation that the people of the Netherlands have to get over their chagrin. That was the previous slide there. Right. So what he's saying quite barefaced really is, look, this referendum is about Ukraine. We know you hate the EU, but support Ukraine anyway. And there was a lot of lobbying going on in Dutch papers. The Christian papers were being told, vote yes to an association agreement with Ukraine to support the persecuted Christians. I mean, as if Christians not persecuted in Western Europe, or as if the Ukrainian or the Russian speakers in the East are persecuted, which they're not. And then simultaneously, the homosexual press in the Netherlands was being told, vote yes to an association agreement with the Ukrainians to raise the profile of gay rights in Ukraine, etc., etc. The animal rights crowd in the Netherlands were being told, vote yes to an association agreement with the Ukraine to improve animal welfare. So the Dutch have realised what's going on here, and that leads us on to this slide, which is that the people who organised the association agreement using a new law, which they had lobbied for to trigger this referendum, they frankly admitted, and to me there's no shame in this at all, although the elite are trying to call it shame, is that they've admitted that the Dutch referendum was actually about getting the Netherlands out of the EU altogether. So yes, Eurosceptics, even UKIP, although it has its faults we've been talking about, Eurosceptics from Britain are now finally having an effect on the Netherlands, and yes, even Germany, Belgium and France, countries that hate learning political lessons from Britain, but they're finally saying, well, yes, the British have it right. For that reason, Brian, the precedent setting, I think the answer to your question of a few minutes ago is probably no, we will not be allowed to vote leave.
Right. Yes, we won't be allowed, because we're not allowed to have an opinion on anything if our King David Cameron thinks otherwise. Well, the Express here is still on the case. Your vote means nothing. Brussels insists land grab plot will go ahead despite Dutch no.
Yes, and I put a comment here that when Sarkozy and then Chirac were French presidents during the last time there were referenda in France and the Netherlands on the Nice Treaty, Chirac in particular said that, well, the Eastern Europeans, of course, this was a different matter, but the same attitude. He said they missed an excellent chance to keep their mouths shut. And when Sarkozy learned of the Irish referendum no to the Nice Treaty in 2005, he exploded in much the way that Cameron is now said often to explode, and said the so-and-so Irish, they've got so much out of the EU, why couldn't they have shown some gratitude? So that's the finger-wagging tone being taken with the Dutch. But I have to tell you, the Dutch themselves are world beaters at finger-wagging and moralising, and they won't take that talking to.
Right. Well, I was fascinated by this one, which is talking about relationships between America and Germany, and Merkel here clearly describing the size of her dinner, or she's impressed with Mr. Obama, I'm not sure which. What is this about?
Well, this is proving that even the core institutions which are there to harness Germany to NATO and the CFR clique are having to admit that it's not working now. The publisher of this piece is the German Marshall Fund, which, if you remember Willy Brandt, who had to resign in an espionage scandal, he was the Chancellor of West Germany, as it then was, who funded this think tank in America. the German Marshall Fund to plead for America to be a good patron to continental Europe and keep sending it cash, largely British cash, I have to say, through Lend-Lease, which carried on until 2006 or so. But even they are having to say here that the Germans have pulled so sharply away from the agenda. Vanessa, who was on yesterday, would call it a hegemonistic agenda. And I found myself in total agreement with that, even though she and I come from politically different ends of the spectrum originally. I have to accept that what she's talking about is true. The project's failing. The Germans are saying, no, we will not get in bed with this current US government because they're not representing the wishes of the American people. The Germans know that well. And they're not respecting privacy anywhere in the world.
Okay. Well, take us on through, because of course if we delve into Parliament, we're back on the subject of Europe and the map of Europe, foreign and security policy.
I thought this was, for starters, a very questionable map of Europe for Parliament to use. It looks like a school, elementary school book map of Europe. But anyway, Parliament has a website and they have to have someone maintain it and put visuals up, so fair enough. What's going on here is that the Lords subcommittee that deals with EU foreign and security policy sent a letter to the former communist, well, in her heart she may still be a communist, Federica Mogherini, who is the High Representative of the EU for Foreign Affairs, following up from our own late lamented Catherine Ashton. Mogherini was told in this report that was sent to her that the Lords Subcommittee thought it was very important. Here's the letter in response, by the way, saying, I take note of what you say. Yes, you can look that up on the website to Lord Tugendhat, the committee chairman. But here's the interesting bit. If you follow it back through the chain to what the Lords actually sent to her, they had a major concentration in their report on the need for the European neighbourhood, as it's called, to be supported through EU aggressive foreign policy. They don't use the word aggressive, but that's what they're talking about. And in particular, in section 39 of their report, which you'll find on the Parliament website there, in bold as a recommendation. I think it's just off the screen here, but you can see the rest of the slide as we talk. Recommendation 39, just under that, is that the European security and defence policy, which is a recent pillar since the Treaty of Amsterdam, a new competency of the EU, must be used in order to force the neighbourhood of the EU to become stable and pro-EU. Well, stable, of course, means unstable for these wordsmiths, because they always say the opposite of what they mean. And this is interesting because official government policy in Britain is that we have an opt-out of the ESDP, and we're never going to get involved in that overreach. But it seems that now, at parliamentary level, Lords level, we are pushing the EU to act as an integrated military force.
And that brings us full circle, of course, David Cameron's devious plan to take us into bed with the French in a military sense for 50 years. It's all coming to the surface, isn't it? The scum is rising to the surface. Can we end, Alex, with your book, please?
Yes, this is a book by John P. Kafferkey, an excellent American historian, called Lord Milner's Second War, and the full title ends up with talking about the start of the New World Order. And the blurb from the book is posted there now. Familiarise yourself with this, please, because it's now exactly a century since the First World War. And the Great War, the First World War, was the second war that the Milner Group, which you'll know about if you've read the Anglo-American Establishment, a previous book we mentioned here. If you've read that, you will know that there was such a globalist group from 1880-something onwards in Britain. Lord Milner's group actually planned the Boer War first and destroyed South Africa that way, and then the second war that they planned was the First World War. And right where I am in Belgium, if I pan the camera around, you can actually see an essay competition being invited here for students to write a thesis on the First World War, WO1 in Dutch acronym, and you can see the bleeding soldiers of Belgium represented by the red dot there under World War I. So this is very much alive in Belgium, the memory of the First World War. The trouble is, none of the students who write that memorial prize essay will be aware that Britain actually planned the destruction of Belgium. So that's why you need to read Lord Milner's Second War to find out what went on.
Brilliant.
Excellent. Well, Alex, Thank you very much for that and taking the time to join us. You're obviously in a wonderful location there because the blue sky and sunshine is very clear. Can I just ask one question? I'm fascinated by the red logo which is on the glass behind you. What is that?
Yes, I thought you would be. This is the Faculty of Linguistics, and if you look at the points of the compass, although it will appear in reverse the way you're looking at it, every point of the compass is a character from a different language. You can see the G with an accent over it from Turkish, the N with a tilde from Spanish for the point south, and so on. So it's supposed to be navigating your way around Europe using languages, but it looks a bit, I don't know, Star of Bethlehem, or in New World Order significance, it could be a star and compass to some other destination.
Yeah. Okay, who knows? Thank you very much for a very informative brief today. We look forward to having you back with us. For our viewers and listeners, thank you for joining us. Thank you for those who've received their UK column pens. And yes, we can supply pens to the Isle of Man. So if you're worried about how that's done, get in contact with us, please. Recommend them to a friend. If you like what we do, we need your support. Please subscribe, donate, or buy a pen or a t-shirt. Everything helps. We'll be back same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.